I still remember the exact temperature of that wine glass in my hand. Cool, smooth. A cheap Bordeaux the hotel concierge had recommended with a slightly embarrassed shrug, as if he was apologizing for not offering something grander. I didn't care. It was perfect. Everything about that evening was perfect in the way that only truly earned moments can be. Not glamorous, not polished, just deeply, quietly real. The sun had already dropped behind the city. Paris at dusk does something to you that no photograph ever captures properly. The light goes golden first, then amber, then a deep bruised violet that settles over the rooftops like a held breath. I had read about that light in books, seen it in films, told myself for years that one day I would stand somewhere in this city and just exist inside it. No deadlines, no reports, no emails waiting on a screen like small, silent accusations. Just this. Layla was beside me, her arms resting on the iron railing of our balcony, looking out over the street below with the kind of expression that people only wear when something they've waited for has finally actually arrived. She wasn't performing happiness. She was feeling it. And that distinction mattered more to me than I can explain, because I had watched her perform happiness at dinner tables and family functions and company events for years. I knew the difference in her face. That night her face was real. She laughed at something. I don't even remember what. Something small. Something nothing. Maybe a pigeon landed on the railing with the particular clumsy arrogance that Parisian pigeons seem to carry. Maybe the couple at the cafe below said something loud enough to float up to us. It doesn't matter what it was. What matters is that it was the first real, unguarded laugh I had heard from her in months. Maybe longer. I had forgotten how it sounded when nothing behind it was being held back. I took a sip of that wine and told myself, silently, in the way you do when you don't want to jinx something, this is it. This is the moment. 6 years. 6 years of approvals denied and requests ignored, and maybe next quarter. From a man who controlled my schedule the way a puppeteer controls a marionette. And here I was. Finally here. And it was worth it. I believed that for approximately 4 more minutes. My phone was face down on the small iron table beside me. I had made a deliberate decision to keep it face down all evening. Not off. I wasn't naive enough to think I could fully disappear. But face down felt like a reasonable act of self-preservation. What I couldn't see, I wouldn't react to. A grown man's version of hiding under the blanket. Then it buzzed. Once, twice. Then a third time in quick succession, which is the rhythm that tells you somewhere in your nervous system, before your brain has even caught up, that this isn't a notification. Someone is calling and not stopping. I didn't look at it immediately. I looked at Lila first. Habit maybe, or instinct. And that is the detail I keep coming back to. The thing that lodged itself in my memory with a sharpness that time hasn't dulled at all. She saw the screen before I turned it over. She must have been able to read the number from where she stood. And in the half second between seeing it and me picking it up, Something moved across her face. Not surprise. That's important. It wasn't surprise. It was the look of someone who has been dreading a specific knock on a specific door and has just heard the knocking begin. Recognition. Dread. And something underneath both of those things that I would only fully understand much later. Guilt. I turned the phone over. Unknown number. I looked at her. She said nothing. She just watched me with those still eyes, and that expression she wasn't trying to hide fast enough. I answered. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, completely ordinary in tone, the way a doctor's voice goes neutral before delivering something that will rearrange your life. 40 seconds. Maybe 45. That's how long it took. Less time than it takes to pour a glass of wine. Less time than that pigeon spent on our railing. In 40 seconds. Delivered in a measured, almost bored voice by a man I had never spoken to before, the architecture of everything I had spent years carefully, painfully constructing, began to make sounds I recognized. The sounds of weight being applied to something that was never designed to hold it. I stood there on that balcony in Paris with the Eiffel Tower behind me and the amber street below and my wife's face in front of me, and I did not speak. I did not react. I just stood very still, the way animals stand still when something larger than them enters the space. And I listened to 40 seconds that I would replay in my mind every single day for the months that followed. But here is the thing. The one thing I could not have predicted. The thing that even now surprises me when I look back at that man standing on that balcony with a cheap Bordeaux going warm in his hand. I was not afraid. There is a particular kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. I grew up with it. It lived in the walls of our house. A small, tired building on the edge of a town that nobody from the outside ever had a reason to visit. 3 bedrooms. A kitchen where the overhead light flickered for so long that we eventually stopped noticing it. A front yard that my father meant to fix up every spring and never got around to. Not because he was lazy, but because by the time the weekend came, his hands were so cracked and swollen from the week that holding a gardening tool felt like punishment. My father fixed cars, not in a garage he owned, in someone else's garage, for someone else's hourly rate, with someone else's name on the sign above the door. He was good at it. Genuinely, remarkably good. And that goodness went entirely unrewarded for 31 years. He retired with a small farewell lunch, a handshake from a man who had made a great deal of money off his precision, and a lower back that would bother him every morning for the rest of his life. My mother cleaned offices, corporate buildings mostly, the kind with glass lobbies and security badges, and people who walked past her cart in the corridor without making eye contact. She never complained about that. What she complained about quietly, in the private language of small size and careful budgeting, was the 28th of the month. That was when the anxiety always surfaced. When she'd sit at the kitchen table with the bills arranged in a row and do the arithmetic she already knew by heart, hoping somehow that this time the numbers would cooperate. They rarely did. I watched all of this. I absorbed it the way children absorb everything around them. Not analytically, not with any conscious intention, but deeply. Into the bones. Into the part of you that makes decisions before your mind has formed words for them. I did not grow up resentful of my parents. I grew up determined, which is a different thing entirely, though people from the outside sometimes confuse the two. I earned a scholarship, engineering, a university 4 hours from home that felt, on the first day, I walked its corridors with a second hand backpack and a room key that stuck in the lock. Like a country I had illegally entered, but desperately wanted citizenship in. I worked two-part-time jobs alongside my degree. One in a campus print shop, mostly evenings. One delivering groceries on weekends in a car that overheated on hills. I graduated without debt, without fanfare, without anyone from the university remembering my name a week later. I got a job. Infrastructure firm, mid-sized, unglamorous. Exactly the kind of company where real work gets done by people whose names never appear in industry profiles. I started at the bottom and I climbed. Not quickly, not loudly, but steadily. 8 years. Junior analyst to senior project lead. Each step earned by staying later than was required, by solving problems that others had quietly abandoned, by being the person in the room who said yes when the work was difficult and nobody else was volunteering. I was not trying to be impressive. I was trying to be irreplaceable. There is a difference, and most people learn it too late. I met Lila at a colleague's wedding on a Saturday in October. She was standing near the back of the reception hall with a glass of something, sparkling she wasn't drinking. Looking at the room with the particular expression of someone who is present in body, but genuinely occupied somewhere else in their mind. I liked that about her immediately. I introduced myself. We talked for 3 hours without noticing the time. She was warm in the way that certain people are warm. Not performed, not strategic, just genuinely interested in what you were saying. She laughed quickly and thought slowly, which is a combination I have always trusted. I did not know about her father until our third date. She mentioned his name the way people mention things they are neither ashamed of nor proud of. As simple fact. Victor Aldane. I knew the name. Anyone in my industry knew the name. Aldane Group was everywhere. Motorways, bridges, public contracts worth hundreds of millions. A company so embedded in the country's physical infrastructure that removing it would have been like removing a bone. I went home that night and sat with that information for a long time. Not because I was intimidated, because I knew, in the honest part of myself, that this was a complication. That a man like Victor Aldane would have opinions about who his daughter loved, and that those opinions would be architectural, structural, load-bearing, impossible to simply work around. I met him for the first time at a Sunday lunch Lila arranged with careful optimism. He arrived 12 minutes late, without acknowledging it. He sat at the head of a table that wasn't his. He asked me 3 questions in 90 minutes. What I did, where I was from, and what my firm's annual turnover was. When I answered all 3 honestly, he smiled the smile of a man who has already filed you under a category and moved on. He never looked me in the eye after that. Not once. Not across dinner tables, or at our wedding, or in the 6 years I would eventually spend working inside his company. I was present in every room we shared. There is a specific kind of compliment that powerful men give when they want something from you. It doesn't sound like flattery. It sounds like assessment, measured, considered. Delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who has already decided the outcome and is simply walking you toward it at a pace that feels, to you, like your own free will. Victor called me into his private office on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Not through his assistant, personally. He appeared at my office door, which was itself unusual enough to make my colleague across the hall look up from his screen, and said, simply, "Come up when you have a moment." Then he left, as if the moment I had was obviously his to request. His office was on the 14th floor to ceiling windows. A desk the size of a dining table. No photographs of family anywhere, which I noted and filed away without fully understanding why it unsettled me. He poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher and pushed one across the desk toward me with the unhurried precision of a man who had rehearsed this exact gesture across decades of similar meetings. Then he made the offer. Senior director, my own division, a salary that was, without exaggeration, 3 times what I was currently earning. A company car, an expense account, access to the kind of projects that engineers spend entire careers trying to get near. He presented it all in a single, unbroken paragraph, the way someone reads a prepared statement. And then he folded his hands on the desk and looked at me. Actually looked at me. For one of the very few times in our entire relationship, and waited. I asked for a week to consider it. He gave me 3 days. I said yes on the 2nd. Layla was happy. Her mother was relieved in the private way mothers are relieved when their daughter's husband stops being a financial uncertainty. I told myself I was building something. I told myself this was the opportunity I had earned. I told myself a great many things in those early weeks that I would later have to carefully, painfully unlearn. The first 6 months were, I'll admit, intoxicating. The work was genuinely interesting. The resources were real. My team was talented. I was solving problems at a scale I hadn't operated at before. And there is a particular satisfaction in that. In feeling the size of your capability expand to meet the size of the challenge in front of you. I worked hard. I delivered. I started to believe that maybe I had misjudged Victor. That maybe the cold indifference he had shown me as a son in law was simply how he operated personally, and that professionally he was simply a man who rewarded results. Then, the contract started appearing on my desk. At first I didn't see it. That is the honest answer, and I give it without pride. The irregularities were subtle. A vendor I didn't recognize awarded a materials contract at a price noticeably above market rate. A subcontractor listed on a bridge project in the eastern region that, when I searched the company registration number, had been incorporated 4 months earlier with no prior history. Line items in budget reports that, individually, looked like rounding errors, but collectively, if you were paying the right kind of attention, told a different story entirely. I was paying the right kind of attention. I raised it internally first, quietly. I went to the head of finance, a careful, gray-haired man named Patterson who had worked for Victor for 19 years. And I laid out what I had found, professionally, without accusation, framing it as a compliance concern that I thought needed to be reviewed. Patterson listened to everything I said. He nodded in several places. He thanked me for my diligence. He told me he would look into it. 2 days later, he called me back and told me the contracts had all been reviewed at board level and were fully compliant. His voice had changed slightly, not dramatically, just enough for me to understand that the conversation we were now having was not the same kind of conversation as the one we'd had 2 days earlier. I went to Victor directly after that. I chose a morning when his diary showed a gap between 9 and 10. And I walked up to the 14th floor without an appointment. His assistant tried to redirect me. I was polite, but I didn't stop walking. I sat across from him and I told him, as clearly and calmly as I could, that I could not continue to sign off on procurement documentation that I believed was being manipulated. I used careful language. I said, believed. I said, concerned. I said, compliance risk. I gave him every professional off-ramp a reasonable man could want. He let me finish. He straightened his cufflink. He picked up his water glass, took a single sip, and set it back down with a small, precise click on the desk. And then he said it. Calm as weather, unbothered as stone. Daniel, you don't have a career outside this building, and you know it. Not a threat delivered in anger. Not a raised voice or a pointed finger. Just a fact, stated simply, by a man who believed it completely because he had spent 3 years making sure it was true. He had pulled strings I hadn't known were attached to me, spoken to people I hadn't known he knew, built walls around my professional future so gradually. There is a kind of suffering that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a dramatic moment or a single breaking point you can point to later and say, there, that was it. That was when everything changed. It arrives quietly, incrementally. The way water gets into the foundation of a building, not through one catastrophic flood, but through years of small, unnoticed seeping, until one morning you press your hand against the wall and feel that something fundamental has gone soft. That is what 6 years inside Victor, Aldane's world, did to me. I showed up every morning. That part I want to be clear about, because it matters. I did not collapse. I did not disappear. I put on the shirt and the jacket, and I drove to that building, and I rode that elevator to my floor, and I sat at my desk, and I did the work every single day, not because I was strong, because I had a mortgage that needed paying on the first of the month, and a wife whose mother needed medical care that cost more than any of us talked about openly, and a life that had people depending on its continued functioning, whether I was falling apart, inside or not. Responsibility is a strange thing. It can save you and destroy you simultaneously. And for a long time, I couldn't tell which one it was doing to me. The documents kept coming. Month after month, quarter after quarter. Reports and procurement approvals and contractors sign. Offs landing on my desk with the quiet regularity of something that has been normalized, so thoroughly that questioning it starts to feel like the abnormal act. I signed some. I pushed back on others using language carefully, calibrated to create a paper trail without triggering Victor's response. I learned to navigate the space between complicity and survival with the exhausting precision of someone walking a very narrow ledge in the dark. I tried to leave twice. The first time was 18 months in. A firm in another city, smaller than Aldane, honest work. A division head role that was a step down in title, but felt, in every way that actually mattered, like breathing. I made it to the final interview stage. The hiring director called me personally to say they were moving forward. I drove home that evening with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something dangerously close to hope. The offer never came. 3 weeks of silence, and then a brief, apologetic email saying the position had been filled internally. I later found out, not immediately, but eventually, through a contact who heard it secondhand from someone inside that firm's HR department, that a call had been made, polite, professional, devastating in the particular way that Victor did everything, which was without fingerprints. The second attempt was 8 months after that. Different city, different sector, similar outcome. The offer went quiet on a Friday afternoon, and by Monday the role had been pulled entirely. I sat with that one for a long time. Not with anger, though the anger was there. With something closer to awe. The architecture of it. The patience required to build a cage so carefully around a person that they eventually stop looking for the door. At home, I was disappearing in increments so small that I think Layla could only see it when she looked at photographs from before. I stopped telling stories at dinner. Not deliberately. I simply ran out of stories that didn't lead somewhere I didn't want to go. I stopped making plans for weekends because plans felt like a kind of optimism I couldn't afford. I stopped being funny. And I had been funny once, genuinely, easily funny in the way that some people are. And losing that felt like losing a language I had spoken my whole life. Layla never said the word unhappy directly. She said other things. She said I seemed tired. She said I seemed far away. She said once, very quietly, after a dinner where I had sat for 40 minutes without contributing a single word, that she missed me. Not that she was angry. Not that she was leaving. Just that she missed me. As if I were already somewhere else and she was sending the words to find me. That one stayed with me for a long time. I developed chest pains at 34. A tightness that started behind the sternum and radiated outward on stressful mornings, which was most mornings. The doctor ran tests, found nothing structurally wrong, and used the word stress with the careful neutrality of someone who knows the real word, but understands you're not ready to hear it. I started waking at 4 in the morning with the particular clarity of anxiety, that bright, cold, merciless alertness that visits you in the dark and presents every unresolved problem in your life simultaneously with the helpful suggestion that there is nothing you can do about any of them right now. I asked for vacation days 3 times in 4 years. Each time I was told the timing wasn't right. Each time Victor had a project, a deadline, a reason that was delivered as a reasonable professional constraint, but functioned as something else entirely. The days accumulated on paper: 31 unused days by the end of year 4, 47 by year 5. A number that should have represented rest and instead represented the precise measurement of how much of my own life I had handed over to a man who would never. There are moments in a person's life that don't feel significant while they are happening. You only understand what they were later, in retrospect, when you can place them inside the larger story and see exactly where the direction changed. And then there are moments that you know, with absolute and immediate certainty, are different from everything that came before them. Moments where something shifts so completely and so finally that even as it is happening, you are already aware that you will never stand on this particular side of it again. The phone call from Victor's assistant was that moment for me. I have replayed it many times, not obsessively, not with bitterness, but with the careful attention of someone trying to understand exactly what it was that changed inside them and when. The assistant's voice was professional, entirely without malice, which somehow made it worse. She was simply delivering a message, reading from something prepared, performing a task she had probably performed before in various forms for various people Victor had decided were no longer useful to him. The restructuring, she said, my position, my team dissolved, return by Monday or be considered to have resigned voluntarily. No severance, no formal process, no acknowledgement of 6 years. Delivered in the middle of my first vacation in all of those 6 years, on a balcony in Paris. While the city glittered behind me with a complete indifference to the fact that my professional life was being quietly folded up and put away by a man who wasn't even making the call himself. I stood very still after I hung up. Layla's hand was on my arm. The wine glass was still in my other hand. The street below was still making its evening sounds. Nothing around me had changed by a single degree, and yet I was standing in a completely different place than I had been 40 seconds earlier. Not a worse place. That is the part I keep returning to. Not a worse place, a clarified one. For 6 years I had been afraid of exactly this: the removal, the exposure. The moment when Victor decided I was more trouble than I was worth and simply switched me off the way. You switch off a light in a room you're leaving. I had shaped my entire existence inside that company around avoiding this outcome. I had signed things I shouldn't have signed and stayed silent when I should have spoken, and swallowed 6 years of Sunday night dread and 4 in the morning chest tightness and disappearing dinners and unused vacation days. All of it. Every single compromised day of it. Because I was afraid of the thing that had just happened. And now it had happened. And I was not afraid. That absence of fear was the most surprising thing I had ever felt. I stood there, and I searched myself for it, the way you probe a tooth you've been told is sensitive, pressing deliberately to find the pain, and it simply wasn't there. What was there instead was something I had almost forgotten the texture of. Clarity. The specific, clean, almost physical sensation of a situation that has finally resolved itself into something simple. For 6 years, I had been managing complexity, navigating, calculating, measuring every word and action against its potential consequence. And in 40 seconds, all of that complexity had collapsed into a single, unambiguous fact. He had made his move, which meant I could make mine. I looked at Layla. Her face was doing the thing it does when she is frightened, but trying to decide whether to show it. I recognized that expression. I had been the reason for it too many times. But what she saw on my face in that moment was apparently something different enough to stop her, because she went quiet in a way that wasn't anxious quiet. It was waiting quiet. The quiet of someone who has just noticed that the person in front of them is not reacting the way they expected. I told her we were not going back on Monday. She started to say something about the consequences, about what that would mean. And I told her I knew exactly what it meant. I told her I had been preparing for this for 2 years. I watched her face move through several expressions in quick succession. Confusion, then something sharpening toward understanding, then a question she hadn't formed words for yet. What I told her next, I had never told anyone. Not because I was hiding it from her deliberately, but because there is a particular kind of preparation you do in silence. Not from secrecy, but from superstition almost. A fear that naming it out loud before it is needed will somehow neutralize it. For 2 years I had been documenting everything, quietly, carefully, systematically. Every irregular contract and mismatched invoice and shell company registration and meeting minute, where the numbers told a story that contradicted the public filings, stored off the company server, encrypted, time-stamped, verified. Not a weapon, I had always told myself, insurance. The distinction had felt important at the time. It didn't feel like insurance anymore. It felt like the foundation of something. A structure I had been building without knowing exactly what it would eventually be used to support. The way certain decisions reveal their purpose only at the moment they become necessary. Victor had spent 6 years making sure I had nowhere to go. He had been meticulous and patient and thorough in the construction of that particular trap. What he had not done, what his arrogance had made structurally impossible for him to do, was consider that the person he was trapping had been